Hey, we're very excited. We have Dr. Michael Koren joins me live here on the studio line. He, of course, with Encore Research Group, local here, right here in Northeast Florida. And Dr. Koren is a medical doctor, cardiologist. Good morning, doctor. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Kevin. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Well, thank you for joining us. And one of the reasons we asked the doctor to join us is that Encore Research Group is involved with COVID-19 vaccine trials, correct?
We are. We're excited that we've been running these studies now for about 3 or 4 weeks, and we have already dosed about 250 patients in clinical research, which I'm happy to report is about 3 times more than all of Russia,
Right.
Which is a side note that we can talk about. But so far, so good. We're seeing a safe experience to date.
A lot of different vaccines out there. Is this one that we would recognize from the media? I know there's different companies involved, Johnson & Johnson and others.
Sure. Yeah, the two that are furthest along in the U.S. are the Pfizer program and the Moderna program, and we are participating in both of those programs.
Okay. And I guess it's also like what we've seen in the news where about half of the people who participate are getting a placebo, correct?
That is correct. These are clinical trials, phase 3 clinical trials. People who participate will not know if they're on the active vaccine or placebo.
If you have any questions, by the way, you're jumping out of the car and you'd like to learn more, go to Encore Docs, DOCS, EncoreDocs.com. That's EncoreDocs.com. We'll put all this information up, too, on our Facebook page and Instagram as well at WSOS Radio so that you can access it if you have to, get away from the vehicle and not listen to all that we have to say. Dr. Michael Koren, once again, medical doctor, cardiologist, is here with us. If people are interested in participating in these COVID trials, are there still slots available?
There are. We anticipate that we'll be enrolling patients probably for the next 3 weeks, at which point the enrollment will probably be filled around the country. Around the country, we're looking for about 30,000 patients, and we hope that we can get at least 500 here in Northeast Florida.
The people that are enrolling, I guess, are they experiencing some symptoms like the flu, like when they get a flu shot, maybe a little bit of achiness in the arm, a slight fever?
So far, actually not. So what's interesting about these new vaccines is that they're very different than previous generations of vaccines. So vaccines in the past were made by actually growing the virus in a big batch of egg media or on leaves. And then once you grow the virus, you have to inactivate the virus or kill it. Then you have to isolate the virus. Then you have to take the piece of the virus that you want to use to inject into somebody to create immunogenicity. And then you have to further purify that and then inactivate it. That's a very complex process that's more fraught with the possibility of some sort of impurities. This new way of doing vaccines is completely different. They're actually manufactured from basic raw chemicals, raw ingredients. And what it is, instead of giving a virus, we're actually giving genetic instructions to people so their immune system knows what to do. So using something called messenger RNA, which you may remember from high school or college biology, that's the little bit of genetic instructions for your body to make certain proteins. So we give people this messenger RNA, put it in what's called a little fat micelle or just a little lipid molecule, and then we give it to people, and their bodies will make the spike protein, but only the spike protein, which generates an immune response from the body. So it's a very clean method of creating immunity by not actually giving a virus, but giving a very specific, pure set of genetic instructions.
Wow. Hey, if you're just tuning in, that's Dr. Michael Koren, medical doctor, cardiologist, and of course he is with Encore Research Group here locally. They are involved in doing coronavirus vaccine trials, and they are enrolling people, and you can learn more about that. They actually allow you to get the process started for enrollment if you go onto the website Encore Docs, that's ENCORE, EncoreDocs.com. That's EncoreDocs.com. Is it your sense, doctor, that this vaccine, the ones that you're testing, once vaccinated for life, or will it be like tetanus and we'll have to go back and do it every 5 or 6 years, or will it be like the flu and we have to do it every year?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we don't know the answer to it. So one of the things that only will be answered with the test of time is how long the immune molecules will circulate in our body and how long will our body have a memory for this particular virus. But the other thing to keep in mind is that COVID-19 is one form of a coronavirus. And when you say flu, you're actually talking about a whole family of viruses. So the reason we get flu shots each year is because the actual flu virus is different each year. And that's part of the family of influenza viruses. So it's possible that we'll have to be dealing with another type of coronavirus in the future, but chances are it won't be exactly COVID-19. So I hope that's clear, but that's a common misperception or perhaps just miswording, is that influenza is a whole series of viruses. So if you say H1N1 flu, that's one type of flu, or Spanish flu is one type of flu, but they're all in the family, and COVID-19 is one of the family of coronaviruses, which, by the way, are very, very common. Coronaviruses usually don't infect humans. They're very common in bats and pigs and other animals, but typically they don't infect humans.
That's Dr. Michael Koren, once again, medical doctor and cardiologist, and he, of course, with Encore Research Group. You can learn more about what they're doing right now, which is enrolling people in a COVID-19 vaccine trial or set of trials. Go to EncoreDocs.com if you're interested. I guess one of the hurdles, or I guess a concern that people would have about enrolling would be, well, gosh, what if I take the vaccine and I don't get the placebo, and I, in effect, get COVID, but the vaccine doesn't work to help protect me from it, but I now have the coronavirus?
Well, again, you don't get the virus when you get the vaccine. There's nothing in the vaccine that's alive. There's nothing in the vaccine that would be able to even reproduce the coronavirus. So we can really reassure people about that. In terms of how effective the virus is, that's why we do research. But we actually have some preliminary information about that. So, for example, both for the Pfizer program and the Moderna program, there have been very high-level medical publications that have shown that people who get the vaccines actually produce very high levels of immunoglobulins that offer immunity, that confer immunity. In fact, the level of antibodies, specifically what's called a neutralizing antibody, is far greater from the vaccine than from actual infection. So in terms of at least the short term, we have a pretty high level of confidence that the vaccine should protect people against COVID-19 infections.
There you go. That's Michael Koren once again, Dr. Michael Koren. He's a medical doctor, cardiologist, based right here locally, but he's also, of course, part of the team at Encore Research Group, and they are doing vaccine trials here in our part of the world. You can sign up if you'd like to participate in these trials. Now, if somebody signs up and they end up receiving the placebo, will they be at the front of the line when the vaccine is actually approved?
Yeah, it's a good question, and keep in mind as you're participating in the trial, you won't know which arm of the trial you're assigned to. Keep in mind also that as part of the trial, if you feel ill and you need to get COVID testing, you can come to our offices and get that done. So that's one of the advantages of participating. Plus, we have a study grant from the sponsor, so we have coverage for your travel expenses and things of that nature. So that's all part of the package. So there are benefits that are not specific just to the product, just to make that clear. As far as what happens once the results are released, I can't guarantee what that would be, but I can tell you that historically, clinical trial participants get the first opportunity to get the actual product. But again, that's not something I specifically have control over, but that's just the tradition of running research studies.
I've read somewhere, too, that if indeed you see after 3 or 4 or 6 weeks that this is really working well with the group that's actually receiving the vaccine, not the placebo group, that there's a possibility of shortening the length of time, that this could become, that the vaccine could be made available perhaps a little bit sooner than we may think?
Sure. Yeah, and that's a very, very interesting question that we are debating amongst medical scientists. So I can give you some insight into that. So typically the flu vaccine is about 70% effective, which means that if you take the flu vaccine, your chances are only 30% compared to somebody that has not taken the flu vaccine of coming down with the flu any given season. So if you use that 70% effectiveness number, we should get a readout on the results for these particular studies probably by the end of November or early December. Now, if the vaccine is more than 70% effective, we'll get that readout earlier, maybe even a month earlier. If it's less than 70% effective, it'll take a longer period of time for the readout to occur. So there is speculation based on how effective the vaccine is, but what will drive that is two things. One is how quickly volunteers come into the study, and that's going very quickly around the country. So that looks really, really good, and we're excited about that. And the second part of the equation is how effective is the vaccine. So as mentioned, we're targeting 70%, but if it's better than that, then we may get a readout earlier.
That's Dr. Michael Koren, once again, medical doctor and cardiologist, and he's with Encore Research Group here in Northeast Florida. You can learn more by going to EncoreDocs.com. They are enrolling right now for people to participate, to potentially get, be a participant in a COVID-19 vaccine trial. You could perhaps get the actual test vaccine, or you may get a placebo. That's all part of the testing process. You mentioned there's 2 that you all are working with. There's others that are out there. Is there the possibility that more than one vaccine will work?
We would expect so, yes. So there are actually 145 vaccines that have been registered with the WHO. So there's a lot of work in this area. Of the 145, about 18 at this point have been tested in humans to some degree. And the ones that are furthest along in the U.S. are the 2 that I just mentioned. There is also a program that's coming out of the University of Oxford, which is relatively far along outside of the U.S., but not so much in the U.S. That study should come to the U.S. probably in September is our best guess. And there's a good chance we'll be involved in that as well. But at this point, the 2 that are most well-developed in the U.S. are the Pfizer and the Moderna programs, which are both this messenger RNA platform, which we're particularly excited about. Some of the other vaccines out there use more traditional methods for developing a vaccine, meaning that they're actually growing the COVID-19. So while that could work, it may be a little bit more fraught with some of the side effects that we typically see with vaccines.
And Dr. Koren, what's the reaction been here in Northeast Florida, in Jacksonville and St. Augustine, in terms of people wanting to participate? Has there been hesitation? Are you happy with the turnout?
No, it's the support of the community has been fabulous, absolutely fabulous. The volunteers have come in. They've been tremendous in terms of getting medical records for us so that we can make sure that they're good candidates for the program and that it's safe for them to participate, which, of course, is part of the analysis before we'd even put somebody in. But the level of enthusiasm has just been absolutely tremendous. So we're you're really humbled by it, to be quite frank.
That's great. Once again, Dr. Michael Koren, medical doctor, cardiologist. He is with Encore Research Group here locally, and they are enrolling and accepting people who would like to apply to participate in a COVID-19 vaccine set of trials that they are engaged in. Go to Encore Docs to start the process. It's very easy. You just fill out some basic information, and then one of their professional team members will get back in touch with you by telephone. But that's Encore Docs, DOCS.com. When we come back, we're going to talk to Dr. Koren about, whether or not we should play sports, whether or not our high school kids here in Northeast Florida should play high school football this fall. That's an issue that's actually on the table today. And we'll ask him, too, about that vaccine that allegedly Russia already has. Stay tuned. Dr. Michael Koren joins us live on the studio line. Not sure if you have a vaccine for the rockin' pneumonia and the boogie woogie flu. That's the name of the song, Doctor.
We're working on it.
Well, hopefully not. That's actually the one thing we're okay with. We're spending time with Dr. Michael Koren. If you just hopped in your car and turned the radio on, we'll get back to the music here in just a moment, but we're very privileged to have Dr. Koren with us live on the studio line right now. He's a medical doctor, cardiologist, and, of course, he is with Encore Research Group. Go to EncoreDocs.com. They're very involved in dealing with and trying to come up with this coronavirus vaccine, going through all the testing, obviously, and the like, and that's going on right now, and they are enrolling people that could participate in this COVID-19 vaccine trial. So you can do that by going to EncoreDocs.com. That's EncoreDocs.com. We were talking before the break today. At some point, high school officials will decide whether or not to have high school football in the fall or to perhaps move it into the spring. A lot of concern about whether, if kids are out there playing football and, those droplets are flying everywhere when people tackle each other and that sort of thing. What are your thoughts, Doctor, about whether or not we should have not just high school football, but SEC football and that whole thing? I mean, what thoughts do you have?
Sure. It's a really, really interesting question. And I always like to be very scientific and very factual when we start to analyze this. And also think about it on the margin. And really what that means is that you have to look at scenario A versus scenario B. It's a comparison at the end of the day. So here are the facts to start. Fortunately, for this particular virus, younger people tend to have a very mild condition. So in the state of Florida, just in terms of knowing what the facts are, if somebody between age 15 and 24 gets infected with COVID-19, their likelihood of needing to go to the hospital is 1 in 100, and their likelihood of dying is 1 in 4,000. So if you compare that with other viruses historically, that's really actually a very modest degree of illness. So compare this with the Spanish flu in 1918, and what people found at that point is that military recruits between the ages of 18 and 24 had a 7% mortality rate. That's dying 1 in 15 of young, otherwise healthy people. So fortunately, this is nothing like the Spanish flu in terms of the risk to young, healthy people. The issue with this virus is that it has a much greater lethality in older people. So when you get to about 60 years of age, then you're looking at a 2 to 3% mortality rate. And when you get to 80 years of age, you're looking at a 20% mortality rate. So the key public health message for this virus has to be to protect vulnerable people. And again, it's not just age that makes you vulnerable. It probably has things to do with your immune system, and that gets to be very detailed medical discussion. But as a general point, we want to keep the virus away from people who are older, people who have pre-existing conditions, and people who may have some sort of immune deficiencies. So the real question is, okay, if the kid's going to play high school football, what happens if they don't play high school football? And if they either playing high school football or not playing high school football, how do we prevent people who may get infected, who are at low risk, from infecting people who are at higher risk? So again, I'm certainly not an expert in high school football, but football is a dangerous game, and there are many other risks, health risks, to high school football and college football and professional football, and I can talk a little bit about that, but in the interest of time, I won't dig in that far. But I would say, strictly from a COVID-19 standpoint, the risk is relatively low to the individual who's playing. It is higher, though, if high school kids are now going back to their parents and grandparents and perhaps putting that at risk. The other part of the equation is that, okay, if they're not playing football, what are the kids doing? So if the kids are socializing and have parties down people's basements or whatever, then we have a problem that's as bad as high school football. So if high school football can be a vehicle to actually promote certain public health concepts like social distancing, wearing masks, and being very, very careful about interactions with older and more vulnerable people, then this may be okay. On the other hand, if playing football doesn't impact those things, it may not be the best thing for us to be considering at this point. In colleges, where you have a little bit more control over what the student-athletes are doing, I would argue that playing football is probably not a bad thing. Again, if they're going to be isolated in their own dorms, if these athletes are going to be following strict protocols in terms of testing and do the proper things if they have positive tests in terms of isolation, or do the right things in terms of exposure to other people who are positive, then I think actually you may find that student athletes in colleges, at least, can maybe have lower rates of COVID infection and certainly lower rates of infecting other more vulnerable people. High school, where you have less control over the living environment of the student athletes, may be a little bit more difficult. And then in professional sports, as we've seen in the NBA and to some degree Major League Baseball, you can actually control the environment so that the participants are less likely to infect vulnerable people. And keep in mind that in the professional sports arena, we've already seen many athletes develop COVID-19 before they even start playing, which reinforces the point that you're really looking at the risk of playing and being in a controlled environment against the risk of living freely in our society, where we know people will be infected with COVID. So hopefully that gives a little bit of context in terms of the decision-making.
Absolutely. Once again, if you're just tuning in, that's the voice of Dr. Michael Koren. He is a medical doctor and cardiologist, and of course he is, you can reach him and learn more about him and the team by going to encoredocs.com. That's encoredocs.com. And of course, this is Encore Research Group, and they're based locally, and they are doing coronavirus vaccine trials, and you can sign up to be considered to participate in one of those trials. Are there particular people that you're looking for, doctor, to participate, that may be of a certain ethnicity or certain gender?
The study is open to all ethnicities and genders. Certainly, we want to make sure that we have adequate minority representation, so you should certainly feel free to participate if you're African American or Latino. That we will certainly consider you a little bit higher risk just in terms of the epidemiology, and would encourage you to participate. We also are looking for people who are facing the crowds that put people at risk. So, for example, if you're in the retail business, you're at higher risk, and we would encourage you to be part of this. If you're in the healthcare industry, you're at higher risk, we'd encourage you to participate. If you have a spouse or a loved one who you need to be in close contact with who has high-risk profile, we would encourage you to be part of it. And, of course, if you have pre-existing conditions, that's important as well. So for folks that, for example, have asthma, or folks that may have had a history of cancer, or folks that are older, we would certainly encourage all those people to come by, learn more about the program. And the reason we want people who are at higher risk is because you have the most to gain from participation in the study.
Once again, that's Dr. Michael Koren, medical doctor and cardiologist, and you can learn more about what we're talking about here in terms of these COVID-19 trials and how you could potentially participate by going to EncoreDocs.com. That's Encore, ENCORE, EncoreDocs.com, and we'll put this information up on our Facebook page, too, at WSOS Radio. I know we're running out of time, but there's the notion that Russia already has a vaccine. Vladimir Putin's daughter, I guess, has already taken it, and she says she's okay. I mean, is that possible? Could they have developed a vaccine this quickly?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, there are 145 vaccines out there, and developing the vaccine is the first step. Testing the vaccine is the much more difficult step. And Russia made the decision to actually promote their vaccine and distribute it in their country based on testing in only about 76 people, according to the reports that I've read, including President Putin's daughter, who, by the way, did develop a fever when she got her vaccine, so she did have a bit of a side effect. Their vaccine is a little bit different than the ones that we're testing here. It's a virus that's been modified, so it's a little bit different. They say they have high levels of immunogenicity. I would tend to believe that, but I would be a little bit skeptical about the safety tested in only 75 people. As I mentioned earlier, we've already tested over 250 people, again, early stages, but have started the testing of 250 people here just in Northeast Florida. So we've actually done 3 times as many patient tests here in Northeast Florida than all of Russia. So you can see the level of scrutiny and safety and concern for drug development and product development in the U.S. is far greater than that in other parts of the world.
Once again, that's Dr. Michael Koren, medical doctor and cardiologist. And it's important to note, too, that, of course, everybody's very interested in the coronavirus vaccine and how they can participate in that. But you all are engaged in doing testing on a variety of other issues as well.
We certainly are. Our organization works out of 8 different locations in Florida, and we're running about 150 studies as we speak in many different areas. So, for example, we have some really fascinating new products for cholesterol problems, for people who have heart disease, for people who have gastroenterological problems such as irritable bowel syndrome or Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis or C. difficile colitis. We have studies looking at Alzheimer's dementia and how to help people with that particular problem, which is a horrible problem. And really, down the road, we cover many, many different areas. So you mentioned our website a few times, and people can certainly browse that website, EncoreDocs.com, and learn more about the studies we're doing. Our phone number for the Department of Nurses who screen patients is also 904-730-0166, 730-0166. So that's another way to contact somebody and learn more about the many programs that we're involved with.
We'll put all that information up on our Facebook page, too. I know it's hard to remember telephone numbers. Many of you are driving around right now, but some great information here, very exciting stuff, and we encourage you to learn more by going online to EncoreDocs.com. That's EncoreDocs.com. Dr. Michael Koren, great job. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're very, very busy, but we appreciate you. You did a tremendous job today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kevin.